Welcome back, my brothers and sisters. Today we are going to talk about the story of Sampson and Delilah, which is one of my favorite stories from the Bible. While it is very, very sad as well, it's still just a really good story. Okay, so let's start. This is, of course, way before Jesus had ever been born, back in the land of Israel. So the Israelites had done evil in the eyes of the Lord. So they were in the hands of the Philistines for 40 years. They had been at this time. Now, there was a man named Manoah, and he and his wife, they were from the tribe of Dan, and they hadn't been able to have any children. Well, one day, whenever the wife of Manoah, as she was out in the field, and an angel appeared to her and told her, "You are going to have a child." And he told her, "Now, when you get pregnant, you can't drink any alcohol, no alcohol at all. You can't eat anything unclean. And once the child is born, you can never ever cut his hair because he's going to be a Nazarite and he's going to be specially blessed by God." And this angel also told her that her son would help get the Israelites free from the Philistines, and whenever he grew up and got older. So the wife, she went and told her husband, and she told him, "Look, I think a man of God was here. He came to me. He looked like an angel to me. And I asked him where he came from, and he wouldn't tell me his name." But she went ahead and told her husband everything that the angel had told her. So when Manoah prayed, and he prayed to God, and he asked, "Will you please, whoever, if this man was sent from you, will you please have him come back to us and tell us how we are supposed to raise this child and care for him? Because he's obviously going to be very special, and he's coming from you, and we don't want to mess up anything." So God heard the prayer of Manoah, and he sent the angel back to the woman while she was out in the field, Manoah's wife. And he came back to talk to her, and her husband, he wasn't there. So, she cried out and went and got her husband and was like, "Come on, come on. He's here. He's back. He's out in the field." So Manoah, her husband, went with her, and they went out to the field real fast. And the angel was still there, and he asked him, "What are we supposed to do? Can you tell us? We need special instructions. What all do we need to do?" And the angel just pretty much told him all the same thing. Your wife can't drink alcohol, she can't eat unclean foods, and no razor can ever touch the head of this child, even whenever he's grown. Don't cut his hair at all. So at this point, they still weren't sure that he was an angel. So then Manoah asked him, can we fix you some food or anything like that to eat? And the angel said, "I'm not going to eat anything you fix at all. And if you're going to fix some food, you should set up, an altar and a sacrifice, give it to the Lord." So then Manoah and his wife asked the angel his name because they wanted to know, because they thought, he's brought us this good news and this blessing. They figured, well, if they're going to have a son, they'd probably name it after whoever this was, because they still didn't know he was an angel at the time. And that's when the angel told him, "You wouldn't understand my name. I don't know why you'd even ask me. It's not something you'd probably even be able to pronounce, basically is what he was saying." So I think at this point they were kind of like, okay, this might be, they were already suspicious this might be an angel. So they went ahead and set up their offering to God. And there was a flame of fire that came from the food, and it shot up to the heavens. And with that, the angel went into the flame and up to heaven. And this is when they knew for sure that that was an angel from the Lord that was standing with them talking. So Manoah's wife eventually gave birth to a boy, and she named him Samson. And as he grew, the Lord blessed him. So whenever Samson was grown, he went down to one of the local towns called Timnah, and he saw this young, beautiful Philistine woman. And he was just like, ooh, wow, just head over heels immediately in love. And so he went back to his dad and his mom, and he told them, oh man, Dad, I saw this beautiful, beautiful woman, and I want to marry her. Go get her for me, Dad. I have to have her. And his mom and dad were like, a Philistine? Really? Can't you find a woman within our tribe? Can't you find someone who's from the tribe of Dan that you would prefer? Why a Philistine? Not a Philistine. Samson was like, no, I don't care. I want this woman I saw. She's the one for me. She's the one I want, and I'm not taking no for an answer. I want you to go get her right now, Dad. So his dad was like, all right, well, I'll go down and get her to be your wife. Now, Samson went to town with his mom and dad, and as they kind of approached the vineyards, Samson had kind of wandered off a little bit by himself. And suddenly, a young lion came roaring towards him. And the Spirit of the Lord that came over Samson, and he tore the lion apart with his bare hands like it was nothing, like tearing apart a young goat. But he didn't tell his mom or his dad what he had done. And then after that, he went down to talk with the woman and, get to know her a little bit. And he really, really liked her. So sometime later after that, he went back to marry her. And he turned to look at the lion's carcass, and he saw a swarm of bees with some honey were in the carcass of the lion. And he scooped out the honey with his hands, and he ate it. He ate it as he went along, which is so gross. When he rejoined his parents, he gave them some of this honey, and they ate it, but of course, he didn't tell them that he had taken the honey from the lion's carcass, which I think is really gross. Now, his father went down to see the woman, and there was a feast. Samson held a feast, which was pretty customary for young men back then, especially if they were planning on getting married. So when the people saw him, they chose 30 different men to be his companions. And Samson decided to tell him, he said, hey, you know what? Let me tell y'all a riddle, okay? And if you can get the answers within 7 days of the feast, I'll give you 30 linen garments and 30 sets of clothes. So one for each of them, right? And if you can't tell me the answer, you have to give me 30 linen garments and 30 sets of clothes. And all of the men were like, okay, yeah, tell us your riddle. Let's hear it, We'll be able to solve it. And so Samson told him, out of the eater, something to eat. Out of the strong, something sweet. And for 3 days, they couldn't give him an answer. So on the 4th day, they went to Samson's wife, who, they had just married. This was their feast. And they told her, try and get the answer to the riddle out of your husband for us, because if you don't, we're going to burn your dad's house and kill everybody in it. So needless to say, these guys were really, really poor sports about the whole thing. So Samson's wife, she was really scared, but She threw herself at Samson and was crying and saying, like, you hate me, you don't really love me, you won't tell me the answer, you gave my people a riddle, and you haven't even told me, your wife, the answer. You're supposed to tell me everything and share everything with him. And Samson told her, I haven't told my mom or my dad the answer either, so why should I tell you? So she continued to cry every day for the entire 7 days of the feast. So on the seventh day, he was like, fine, I'll tell you. She kept pushing him, and he just wanted her to quit crying. He wanted her to be happy. And so as soon as he told her, she turned around and, of course, told all her people. And so before sunset on the seventh day, the men of the town came to him with the answer. And they said, what is sweeter than honey? What is stronger than a lion? Now Samson said to them, if you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have solved the riddle. So he absolutely knew that she had told him, his wife had gone and told him the answer, because he knew that none of them were going to be able to get it. Can you imagine the man you just married, though, calling you a heifer? Have you plowed with my red heifer? Okay, so he's really mad. Samson's rightfully really, really angry. So the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully onto Samson. So he went down to another town full of Philistines called Ashkelon. And he struck down 30 of their men, stripped them of everything they had on, and went and gave their clothes to the other Philistines of the other town who had been able to answer the riddle unfairly. But burning with anger, Samson went back to his dad's home because he was just angry. And when this happened, Samson's wife was given to one of the companions who had attended at the feast. Okay, so later on, at the time of the wheat harvest, Samson went and got a young goat, and he took it and he went to visit his wife because he didn't know what had happened. He was just angry and went to cool off for a while. But for at least a few days, maybe more. Maybe it could have been months. I'm not sure. It doesn't say exactly. But when he went to see his wife, her dad was there, and he stopped him. And Samson was like, look, I'm going into my wife's room. I'm going to see her. And that's when her dad said, man, I thought you hated her, so I gave her to your companion. And he said, isn't her younger sister more attractive? Here, take her instead. You can have her, marry her. And Samson was so angry. I don't blame him, but he was furious. And Samson said to them, this time I have a right to get even with the Philistines, and I am really going to harm them. So he went and caught 300 foxes, and he tied them tail to tail in pairs of 2. Then he fastened a torch in every pair of tails, and then he let the foxes loose so they could run through the grain of the Philistines. It burned up all the shocks and all the standing grain, together with their vineyards and their olive groves. So, it just caused massive destruction. And when the Philistines found out, they said, who did this? And then they were told it was Samson, the son-in-law, because his wife was given to the companion. He's really angry, and he went and did this. So the Philistines went up and they burnt his wife and her dad to death. And Samson, when he found out, he was so angry, and he swore to them that he would not stop until he got revenge on every single one of them. He attacked them viciously and slaughtered many of them. Then he went down and stayed in a cave in the rock of Etam. And the Philistines went up and camped in Judah. The people of Judah would ask the Philistines, "Why have you come to fight us? What did we do? What's going on?" And they said, "We've come to take Samson prisoner. We're going to do to him exactly what he did to some of us." So then 3,000 men from Judah went to the cave that Samson was in. And they said, "Don't you realize that the Philistines are rulers over us? What have you done to us, Samson?" And he just merely answered them and said, "Look, I did to them what they'd done to me." And then they said, "Well, we've come to tie you up and hand you over to the Philistines." And Samson said, "All right, well, swear to me that you won't kill me yourselves." And they agreed, and they said, "We promise we're not going to kill you. We're just going to tie you up, and we're going to hand you over to the Philistines." So they bound him up with new ropes, and they took him over to the rock where the Philistines were waiting for him. So as they approached, the Philistines came running, shouting at him. And that's when the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon Samson. And the ropes that were on his arm became like charred flax. And the bindings, they dropped from his hands. So Samson saw a fresh jawbone of a donkey. And he grabbed it and he struck 1,000 men dead with the jawbone of an axe. And then Samson said, "With the donkey's jawbone I have made donkeys of them. With the donkey's jawbone I have killed 1,000 men." So not only was Samson mighty and strong, we can see he was also a bit of a poet. So after that, he was very, very thirsty. And he cried out to the Lord, and he said, "You've given me this great victory, but now I'm going to die of thirst, and I'm going to fall into the hands of the uncircumcised Philistines." But then God, he opened up a hollow place in Lehi, and water came out of it. And when Samson drank, his strength returned, and he revived and felt so much better. And that spring is still there in that same place in Lehi today. Samson led Israel for 20 years in the day of the Philistines. One day, Samson went to Gaza, where he saw a prostitute. He went in to spend the night with her. The people of Gaza were told that Samson is here. So they surrounded the place, and they laid in wait for him all night at the city gate. They didn't move, and they didn't make a sound. And they were like, "Okay, at dawn, we're going to kill him." But Samson, he only lay there with the prostitute until the middle of the night. Then he got up, and he took hold of the doors of the city gate. Together with the two posts, he tore them loose, bar and all. He lifted them up on his shoulders, and he carried them to the top of the hill that faces Hebron. Now, sometime later, he fell in love with a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. The rulers of the Philistines went to her and said, "If you can lure him into showing you the secret of his strength and how we can overpower him, then we'll be able to tie him up and subdue him. And each one of us will give you 1,100 shekels of silver." So Delilah said to Samson, "Tell me the secret of your strength and how you can be tied up and subdued." Samson answered her, "If anyone ties me with 7 fresh bowstrings that have not been dried, I'll become as weak as any other man." Then the rulers of the Philistines, they brought Delilah 7 fresh bowstrings that had not been dried, and she tied him with them. Now these men hid in a room, and she called to Samson, and she said, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you. They're here to get you." But he snapped the bowstrings as easily as a piece of string snaps when it comes like close to a flame. So the secret of his strength was obviously not discovered. Then Delilah, she got upset and she said, "You've made a fool of me. You lied to me." And she said, "Come on now. Tell me. Tell me how you can be tied." And he said, "If anyone ties me securely with new ropes that have never been used, I'll become as weak as any other man." So Delilah took new ropes and tied him with them. And the men, of course, again, were hiding in their room. And she did the same thing. She said, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." But he snapped the ropes off his arm as if they were just like merely threads. And Delilah, she said to Samson, "Again, you've been making a fool of me all this time. You're lying to me. Tell me how you can be tied." And so then he replied, "If you weave the 7 braids of my head into the fabric on the loom and tighten it with a pin, I'll become as weak as any other man." So while he was sleeping, Delilah took the 7 braids of his head, wove them into the fabric, and tightened it with a pin. And again she called to him, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." And he woke from his sleep and he pulled up the pin and loom with the fabric. And then she said to him, "How can you say I love you when you won't confide in me? This is the 3rd time you've made a fool of me and haven't told me the secret of your strength." With such nagging, she prodded him day after day until he was sick to death of it. So he told her everything. "No razor has ever been used on my head because I have been a Nazarite, dedicated to God and from my mother's womb. If my head were to be shaven, all my strength would leave me and I would become as weak as any other man." Now, when Delilah saw that he had really told her everything, she sent word to the rulers of the Philistines, "Come back once more. He has told me everything." So the rulers of the Philistines returned with the silver and gave it to her. And after putting him to sleep on her lap, she called for someone to come and shave off the 7 braids of his hair. And so that began to subdue him, and his strength left him. Then she called, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." And he awoke from his sleep and thought, "I'll go out before and I'll just shake myself free." But Samson, he didn't realize that the Lord had left him. He didn't realize what had been done. Then the Philistines seized him. They gouged out his eyes and they took him down to Gaza, and they binded him with bronze shackles, and they set him to grinding grain in the prison. But the hair on his head began to grow again after it had been shaved. Something about taking prisoners to Gaza, doing horrible things to him. Now, the rulers of the Philistines, they assembled to offer this great big sacrifice to Dagon, their false god, and celebrated, saying, "Our God has delivered Samson, our enemy, into our hands." And then when all the people saw Samson, they praised their false god, saying, "Our God has delivered our enemy into our hands, the one who laid waste to our land and multiplied our slain." Now, while they were high in spirits and they shouted, "Bring out Samson to entertain us." So they went and got Samson out of the prison, and they made him start performing, in this big arena thing that they had, probably for like gladiators and stuff like that. Now, when they stood Samson in this arena thing, there were some pillars, and Samson said to the servant that was holding his hand, he said, "Look, put me near the pillars that support the temple, so that I can lean against them and, kind of rest." And the temple, it was crowded with men and women. And the rulers of the Philistines were there. And on the roof were about 3,000 men and women watching Samson perform. Then Samson, he prayed to the Lord. He said, "O sovereign Lord, please remember me. Please, God, strengthen me just once more. And let me with just one blow, get revenge on the Philistines for what they did to my 2 eyes." They had taken his 2 eyes. Then Samson reached toward the 2 pillars on which the temple stood, bracing himself against them, his right hand on the one and his left hand on the other. Samson said, "Let me die with the Philistines." Then Samson pushed with all his might, and down came the temple on the rulers and all the people in it. He killed more than at this event than the entire time he lived, the Philistines. He killed more just from this one final act. Then after this, his brothers and his dad's whole family went down and got his body, and they took him back and they buried him where his dad laid, and where he had led the Israelites for 20 years. I hope you enjoyed the story of Samson and Delilah. I'm sure some of y'all, quite a few of y'all have heard it, but if any of y'all haven't, I hope you really enjoyed it. This is a true story from the Bible, and if you enjoyed it, please leave me a like. Leave me a comment and let me know if you enjoyed this and if you'd like to see me do more. Be sure and subscribe and follow me. And if you did enjoy this, please share it. If you haven't, you can join my locals. And I am on X, Getter, and I am also on Rumble and YouTube. So be sure and follow me all those places and subscribe, and I appreciate you all. And be sure and check out some of my other videos today. I'm doing a whole lot, trying to really get going. And look, I appreciate everybody who's been following me and everybody who's been commenting. It helps me so much. I can't even tell y'all how much I appreciate you. I hope you're all blessed, and I hope you're all doing okay. And I will definitely see you in the very next video.